André Rieu once proudly told his audience, "Music brings people together," but the world never knew how literal, how deeply personal, and how painfully true that statement really was. Because behind the elegance, behind the golden violin, behind the glittering stages filled with dancers and fireworks, André Rieu carried a secret for 30 long years, one that reshaped his life, his music, his ambition, and his entire relationship with the world of classical performance. While he dazzled millions, while he made the world waltz again, while the maestro of Maastricht became a global icon, there was a second life unfolding quietly behind the scenes. A story woven into his childhood, his marriage, his orchestra, and the empire he built from nothing but discipline, heartbreak, relentless passion, and a dream he refused to let die. Born on October 1949 in Maastricht, the Netherlands, André was the third of 6 children in a household where music wasn't a hobby, it was law. His father, Andries Antony Rieu, conductor of the Limburg Symphony Orchestra, believed greatness required sacrifice, severity, and silence. At 5 years old, when most children learn to play games, André learned scales under the sharp gaze of a father whose approval he rarely, if ever, received. He later confessed with a trembling voice, "He never said he loved me. He never said he was proud of me. Never." Those words reveal the ache beneath the maestro's smile, the stone that sat heavy on a young boy's heart as he practiced day after day in a house filled with expectations he could never meet. Yet that same strictness carved the precision and perfection that defined his future. From 1968 onward, André studied in Liege and Maastricht, mastering technique under Joe Ueda and Herman Krebers, learning not just how to play, but how to feel music according to the unforgiving classical European standard. His talent grew, his discipline sharpened, and eventually he moved to Brussels to study with Professor André Gertler, graduating in 1977 with the prestigious Premier Prix. Those years opened his eyes to the structure of the waltz, a form he would later describe as the language of joy, a language he believed the world desperately needed to hear again. Throughout the 1970s, he performed with various orchestras, earning praise for his flexible, emotionally charged conducting style. Yet something inside him resisted the traditional path. He saw a gap between the grandeur of classical music and the hearts of ordinary people. He wanted to bring music to the masses, not keep it locked behind velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers. He once said, "She keeps everything balanced between music and reality." And that partnership became the backbone of what would later grow into a global artistic empire. Together, they studied audiences, experimented with performances, and realized that the waltz, with its easy 3/4 rhythm, emotional sweep, and romantic charm, was the perfect bridge between classical tradition and modern life. In 1978, André founded the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, the first ensemble that reflected his personal dream. They played in small halls, theaters, even public squares where people who never attended a classical concert found themselves smiling, clapping, dancing. It was here that André learned his greatest lesson. To reach people, music has to breathe. It has to dance. He rearranged Strauss pieces, added brighter tempos, encouraged musicians to move, engage, and enjoy the music. He wasn't building an orchestra, he was building a new experience. Through these humble beginnings, he learned to manage musicians, handle schedules, negotiate payments, and run an ensemble. Skills few classical violinists possessed at the time. By 1987, after a decade of experimentation and relentless observation, André was ready to take the greatest leap of his life, the creation of the Johann Strauss Orchestra, the foundation of a 30-year journey that would push him to the brink of exhaustion, bring him unimaginable success, and eventually force him to live between two worlds, one public, dazzling and joyful, and one private, fragile and full of truths he kept hidden. He began with 12 members, rehearsing obsessively for 6 months before their first official concert on New Year's Day, 1988. That moment marked the beginning of a revolution. André wanted classical music to escape the stiff confines of the concert hall. He wanted it outdoors, under the stars, in the streets, in arenas, in hearts. He played his priceless 1667 Stradivarius violin, carrying it like a piece of his soul to every show. Marjorie built the organizational backbone, handling finances, recruiting musicians, designing logistics, and creating a business structure unlike anything the classical world had ever seen. André often said, "I couldn't run this orchestra without her," and he meant it. Their model was bold. Instead of depending on corporate sponsorships or wealthy donors, they chose independence, believing the waltz could stand strong on its own legs. This decision forced André to take enormous risks, many of which nearly... André Rieu's rise into global musical legend was never just a story of melodies and grand stages. It was the relentless construction of an empire built note by note, risk by risk, and sacrifice by sacrifice. A journey driven by vision so intense it often pulled him far beyond the boundaries of traditional classical music, pushing him into a world where he became not only a maestro, but a businessman, a creative director, a producer, and the central character in a musical epic that would span continents. After developing his own direct ticketing system, which gave him total oversight of sales, audiences, and revenue, André took complete control of every production element surrounding the Johann Strauss Orchestra, overseeing stage design, lighting, costumes, and even the visual storytelling that shaped the atmosphere of each performance, effectively transforming the once modest ensemble into a fully independent artistic company with its own identity, rhythm, and personality. In an interview with Classic FM, André famously said, "Johann Strauss was not only a great musician, he was a brilliant businessman," a statement that perfectly captured the philosophy he had quietly lived by for years, that art cannot survive without structure, discipline, and management. And so, he became not just the musical leader, but the narrator of every concert, the warm voice in between pieces, sharing charming stories, playful anecdotes, and historical insights that made audiences feel less like spectators and more like honored guests invited into a celebration. In 1991, he made a daring decision to record concerts for national television, a costly gamble, but the results were electric. Suddenly, millions of viewers saw not stiff, formal musicians, but a lively orchestra filled with joy, humor, movement, and color. By 1993, the orchestra had grown to nearly 30 members, ready to take on stages larger than any they had seen before. During this period, André was also developing himself behind the scenes. He built a small recording studio in his home in Maastricht so he could independently control sound quality, produce albums at lower cost, and shape every detail of his recordings. The artist-producer model that the world would later marvel at was being carefully assessed. Promoters from around the world began calling, tickets sold out at staggering speed, and the Johann Strauss Orchestra evolved from a regional ensemble into a symbol of how classical music could be reborn for modern audiences. From 1997 onward, André embarked on ambitious tours through the United States, Australia, Japan, and across Europe, venues filled with tens of thousands of people who had never before attended a classical concert, people who laughed, danced, cried, and swayed to music that had once belonged strictly to upper-class ballrooms. André's live DVDs and recordings became global bestsellers, allowing millions of fans, those who could never travel, to experience the energy of his concerts from their living rooms. By 2005, he began hosting his now iconic summer concerts in Vrijthof Square, transforming his hometown into a global meeting point of joy and celebration. People from dozens of countries filled the square each year, dancing under the soft glow of lights as André played his beloved 1667 Stradivarius, and he often said, "Seeing the world gather in my hometown, it is the most beautiful feeling." These concerts became cultural landmarks, inspiring similar open-air events in France, Germany, and Australia. By 2007, the Johann Strauss Orchestra had grown to more than 50 members, supported by hundreds of behind-the-scenes staff who ensured that André's touring system operated with the precision of a world-class corporation. He became one of the highest-grossing live performers in the world, an extraordinary achievement for a classical musician. The pinnacle of this era came in 2008, when André invested 24 million euros to recreate Austria's Schönbrunn Palace as a full-scale stage backdrop, complete with cavalry units, a choir of more than 100 singers, and theatrical production elements typically reserved for grand opera. Critics were stunned, audiences gasped. The world called it a classical spectacle, unlike anything ever attempted, but the enormous expenses placed a crushing burden on André's company, stretching his resources to the breaking point. Yet he never saw it as a failure. To him, it was proof, brilliant, shining proof, that classical music could unite tens of thousands of hearts in shared joy, that it could break the limits of tradition, that it could become not a museum piece, but a living experience. But this triumph also led him toward the hardest chapter of his journey, a chapter where his finances, his health, and the entire performance. After the global explosion of his music and the worldwide recognition that followed, André Rieu entered one of the most demanding, exhausting, and defining chapters of his entire career. A chapter that stretched him physically, mentally, and emotionally in ways he had never experienced before, revealing the hidden cost of living at the center of a musical empire he had built with his own hands. By 2010, after years of intense touring across the United Kingdom, Australia, Europe, and beyond, André's body finally reached its breaking point. While preparing for another massive run of concerts, he fell suddenly ill, and doctors diagnosed him with a viral vestibular nerve infection, an illness that brutally attacked his balance and caused violent dizziness every time he tried to stand. He later admitted in an interview, "Every time I stood up, I was sweaty and dizzy," and this terrifying condition forced him to cancel entire tours, issue tens of thousands of ticket refunds, and step away from the stage for nearly 3 months, the first time in years the Johann Strauss Orchestra had ever paused. During his recovery, isolated at home and stripped of the momentum that had defined his life, André was forced to confront his own limitations. His body had been pushed past exhaustion by thousands of hours spent conducting, traveling, rehearsing, and performing with relentless passion. For a man whose identity was tied to music, motion, and connection with the audience, stopping wasn't rest, it was agony. At the same time, the financial ghosts of his golden era returned to haunt him. The majestic 24 million euros Schönbrunn Palace stage project of 2008, of the boldest artistic risks in classical music history, had relied heavily on his personal reserves, and now, as his health crumbled, his finances were staggering under that enormous weight. André described this as the darkest moment of his career. Every morning he woke up torn between fear and determination, between worry and forward motion. It was in this moment, backed into a corner by illness and expenses, that André and Marjorie began restructuring the entire operational backbone of the orchestra. They reduced logistical costs, shortened long-distance tours, and poured more resources into video and television production, bringing the orchestra into homes worldwide even when André couldn't travel. When his health slowly recovered, he returned to the stage, but with a new philosophy and a new pace. Instead of racing across continents, he focused on cities that had always embraced him: Maastricht, Vienna, Cologne, carefully balancing performance quality with his physical limits. At their home, the historic Dorentius Castle in Maastricht. André transformed the centuries-old building into a creative headquarters, a recording studio, sound workshop, costume rooms, editing suites, and tour management offices, all operate. Each morning, André, Marjorie, and their son Pierre gathered in a small office in the castle's east wing to design set lists, negotiate contracts, review production plans, and carry forward the massive enterprise André had built from scratch. It was here, in this quiet sanctuary, that he rebuilt his life and the orchestra from the ground up. After surviving his health scare, André adopted a new lifestyle: morning exercise, limited alcohol, strict sleep schedules, and an unwavering commitment to never give up. In 2012, he expanded his presence on European and American television. Concerts from Maastricht and Vienna aired across multiple networks, allowing fans worldwide to experience his art even when he wasn't physically touring. Throughout these difficult years, Marjorie and Pierre served as his pillars. Marjorie managed the finances with precision, while Pierre handled production and communications, forming a resilient trio that kept the Johann Strauss Orchestra alive during its most turbulent period. By 2016, André was back in full form, releasing albums, planning tours, and proving once again that his passion could overcome any crisis. But then came 2020, and the world changed overnight. The COVID-19 pandemic halted global travel, shut down venues, and silenced entire industries. For André, the impact was catastrophic. Every concert, including the iconic Vrytov Summer Series, was canceled, and for the first time since its founding, the Johann Strauss Orchestra faced total shutdown. Yet André made a decision that stunned the music world. He refused to fire a single musician, technician, or staff member. He continued paying every one of the 120 employees on his team, absorbing operational costs that reached €1 million per month while earning zero performance income. His leadership during this period became a model of courage, loyalty, and responsibility. The Dutch government later granted €10 million through a cultural relief program, helping André maintain payroll and essential operations. When Europe slowly reopened, André tested the waters with mid-scale concerts in Maastricht and Vienna. The shows sold out instantly, proving his connection with audiences had not merely survived the pandemic, it had deepened. By 2023, the orchestra regained full momentum. André reinvested in the string section, expanded the choir, and returned to his He followed this with the album Thank You Johann Strauss, honoring the composer who shaped his artistic soul. In an interview with The Telegraph, André said, "I'm building an audience that loves music," a simple line that encapsulated decades of devotion to making classical music joyful and accessible. Even at 70 plus, André's pace hasn't slowed. He is actively planning a 2026 world tour featuring new destinations in Asia and South America, while recruiting young musicians to preserve the orchestra's future. His life now stands as the perfect embodiment of his double identity: artist and entrepreneur, dreamer and strategist, performer and executive. A duality that built one of the most successful classical enterprises in modern history. 30 years after founding the Johann Strauss Orchestra, André Rieu remains committed to one mission: bringing the waltz to everyone, everywhere. Beneath the ticket numbers, album sales, and global achievements, he is still the same man holding his beloved 1667 Stradivarius, believing with all his heart that music, more than anything else, has the power to connect us across borders, generations, and time. And if you believe in that power, share this story so the world can discover André Rieu, the man who turned the waltz into the universal language of joy.